Necropolis, and alrighty people at home, welcome to Craig's Da Vinci Code Tours, where I take the traditional walking tour and update it, live stream it to those around the world who can't actually tour. Today we're going to be looking at Glasgow's Necropolis and the Da Vinci Code style twist. Now, Marcus, you're familiar with the film?
Pardon?
Are you familiar with the Da Vinci Code, the movie?
Yeah, kind of, yeah.
Kind of. What about you, Abby?
No, I've not watched it.
Right, well, the Da Vinci Code movie kind of touches on the myths and legends in and around the Holy Grail and stuff. And their take on it is the Holy Grail is the lineage of Jesus Christ himself. So in the movie, they allude to the lineage of Jesus Christ being the St. Clair family. So buried down there just in the lower terrace is actually a member of the St. Clair family. Mm-hmm. So you could say we've got our own wee bit of the Holy Grail actually buried here in the Glasgow Necropolis. Now, the movie itself actually looks at the secret language hidden in the art and architecture all around us. This tour tries to do exactly that in Glasgow's Necropolis, which is one of the largest Freemasonic symbols in the world. Now, it's not just myself that says that. It was back in 2007, there was an international conference in the history of Freemasonry. It was through in Edinburgh in the Freemasons Hall. There were the patrons of the conference were the Grand Masters of Scotland, England, Ireland, and there was over 200 international guests. There were 72 speakers from around the world who gave speeches, and including one of the speakers was a historian, Ronnie Scott. Now, what Ronnie Scott put forward is the Glasgow Necropolis is laid out in the way to be a big metaphor for the journey through Freemasonry. Now, the necropolis itself is actually laid out similar to the Père Lachaise over in Paris. Have you ever been there, Marcus?
Paris?
Yeah, you've been to Paris,
Right,
haven't you?
right.
Did you go to the Père Lachaise?
I guess I did, yes.
The cemetery where Jim
Right.
Morrison stuff is. Now that's laid out exactly the same fashion. It's laid out from west to east. Now, west symbolising the dark, the night time, and the east representing the daytime, the sun, obviously, the sun rising in the east and setting in the west. So, the idea about laying it out in such a fashion as you're moving into the necropolis, you're moving from the dark to the light, which is a metaphor for the journey through Freemasonry. Now, Mr. Scott confirmed that the necropolis is laid out in a pattern that is a very large and solid representation of Masonic ideas and symbols. He was quoted as saying the necropolis is clearly a Freemasonic landscape. Now, the necropolis itself opened in 1833, and it was designed and funded by the Merchant House of Glasgow, most of whom were Freemasons at the time. Now, if we look over there, you'll see that we enter through gates. That's one of your first hurdles when you enter Freemasonry. It's called guarding the Western Gate. It's whereas people in the fraternity of Freemasonry won't allow anybody that would bring dishonour into the fraternity, and so they guard the Western Gate. So that's your first metaphor there for your journey through Freemasonry. Before you can even become a Freemason, you have to get through the Western Gate. Mm-hmm. Now, as we continue our wee journey on here, we'll just walk down a wee bit. You'll then see that we're now walking down to the Bridge of Sighs. Now, the bridge actually symbolises moving from one existence into another. Now, in death, I think that's very obvious. You're moving from one existence to another, but it's also what Freemasons consider happened to themselves through the journey of entering into the fraternity. They believe they're moving from one existence into another. Now, the bridge, and then if you look over there, which was initially meant to be meant to be lots of tunnels and a subterranean entrance into the necropolis. At the time, there was a lot of grave robbing and whatnot in this time. So body snatching was big business back then. So the rich and wealthy like to get their bodies buried as deep down in the earth as they could. Less likely of the body snatchers getting a hold of it. In and around the time of the opening of the Necropolis, there was a new Atomy Act, which basically put an end to the problem of body snatching and stuff. That combined with the technical difficulties of trying to tunnel into the hill and creating an entrance up in the top of the hill, they scrapped the idea of that actually being the entrance. Now, what we're actually standing on just now, it's actually called the Bridge of Sighs. Now, the interesting thing about that is there's a few Bridge of Sizes in the UK. One of them's down in Cambridge. Now, right next to the Bridge of Sighs in Cambridge is what's known as the Round Church. This was built in the 12th century, and it was built to represent the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. That's the church over in Jerusalem. The reason they call it a round church is that's the church that Jesus allegedly was crucified and buried at. And it's circular in design. So the round rotunda of the circular church down in Cambridge represents the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. Now, down in Cambridge, you have the Bridge of Sighs and the round church looking down on it. And if you notice here, you actually we'll walk on a wee bit and we'll get a better view of this. But we're actually standing on the Bridge of Sighs here as well. And right up there, behind that tree, which you'll see in a wee second, is the mausoleum of Major Archibald Douglas Monteith. Again, his mausoleum is actually modelled on the Church of the Holy Sepulchre over in Jerusalem. So both here in Glasgow and down in Cambridge, you have the exact same symbolism incorporated within the architecture. So what's that actually telling you? Well, for me, it's the Freemasons who built. It was the Merchant House of Glasgow. A lot of them are very rich Freemasons, and they've incorporated a lot of their mythology into the art and architecture and a lot of the things they've actually built.
So which is the thing that you just pointed out?
Come on out round here. Very hard to see because of the tree.
Oh, right, okay. That round structure?
Yeah, we'll go up there later on and we'll see that close
So
up.
that was originally built with this, like the same stone, right?
Yeah, well, they were built at the same time.
Yeah.
And by a lot of the same architects.
Yeah.
The main architect that was responsible for a lot of the mausoleums and monuments and stuff was actually Alexander Greek Thomson.
All right.
A
What is a mausoleum exactly?
mausoleum is just like a tomb.
Okay,
Fancy
so-
word for a tomb.
Okay, so that's like his.
Him and his brother are both buried there. Major Archibald Douglas Monteith, very interesting man. I'll go into a wee bit more history about his family and where he came from. Now, as I explained, it's laid out to resemble a metaphor through Mason's journey through the fraternity. So you had the Western Gate that we passed through. It represents your entry into Freemasonry. You have the bridge, which symbolises moving from one existence into another. Then what we have here, as you can clearly see, you have the two pillars. This was originally meant to be the entrance to the Glasgow Necropolis, but due to technical difficulties and no longer the necessity for burying the bodies very deep, that was scrapped. But it was meant to be lots of catacombs and stuff with lots of burial chambers and stuff. Now, talking about the metaphor with regards to your journey through Freemasonry, the two pillars here, and this might be something you're aware of, Abby, you know a bit about tarot. So are you familiar with, is it Boaz and Jachin? No, well, these are they're very strong symbols in Freemasonry. They represent the two pillars that were on the porch of Solomon's Temple. And I don't know about the tarot side of it, but I know the Freemasonry kind of side of it. So the two pillars represent Boaz and Jachin. Boaz on the left and Jachin on the right. Now, as I said, these were the two pillars from the porch of the first temple in Jerusalem. Solomon's temple was built and designed by chief architect Hiram Abiff, a very important figure in Freemasonry. Originally, it was meant to be the subterranean entrance there, as I mentioned, but the 1832 Cemeteries Act was passed. Sorry, the 1832 Atomy Act was passed, which basically solved the problem of body snatching. Now, the whole idea of the Glasgow Necropolis came from the Père Lachaise in Paris. That was commissioned by Napoleon, who was rumoured to be a Freemason, and it was built by a very famous Freemason, Alexander Theodore Brongniart. He was the actual architect for the necropolis over in Paris. The Père Lachaise is known as the Cemetery of the East. Again, the East representing light. So again, you've got the Masonic mythology built into even the name of the Père Lachaise. And it's laid out, if you go and look onto Google Earth and stuff and just compare the Glasgow Necropolis and the Père Lachaise in Paris, you'll see that they're laid out in a west to east fashion, representing so Freemasons and other people can take the journey from the dark to the light, even in death or after their death. Now, another very common symbol in Freemasonry is Jacob's ladder. It's very people are aware of that through the biblical references and stuff.
I think that in Edinburgh there's a set of stairs like Jacob's ladder.
Yep.
Yeah.
Again, that's very much biblical references and very much in the Freemasonic mythology. Now, in my travel, so the Masonic ladder represents the great chain of being, and it symbolises the hierarchical ordering of the universe. Basically, regardless where you are, we're all in it together to contribute. So it doesn't matter how rich or how poor you are, you're part of a whole. So it basically allows you to feel that you're sort of a part of something bigger than yourself.
Similar to the caste system in India.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But if you look down there to your left, that wee path there, that was where the first burial took place. At the end of that path is a small section, it's the tertiary section, and that's not the first burial. That took place in 1834, a year before the first Christian burial. Down there, that street, you can see the roads, the cars going up and down. That's called Bishop Street. That's named after a leading figure he was a leading figure in Scotland's Reformation. Now, the Glasgow Necropolis itself, and we'll continue to climb Jacob's ladder. Glasgow's Necropolis itself, it has over 50,000 people buried here in the necropolis, with over 3,500 monuments and mausoleums. Apparently, every burial has been recorded in the Mitchell Library. So if you were ever wanting to do any research or find out who's buried here, the Mitchell Library has a lot of records on that. So anybody wanting to do any research at all on Glasgow Necropolis, Mitchell Library is a very good place to start. Now, I don't know if you are familiar with Wee Willie Winkie.
Wee Willie Winkie.
Yeah.
Right. So that's actually the monument for the man who wrote Wee Willie Winkie. Famous worldwide. It always surprises me. Wherever you go in the world, everybody knows about Wee Willie Winkie. Are you struggling with the gimbal, Nicky?
No, you just carry it.
Now, let Marcus take a few photographs. Nicky, move forward. Let Marcus take a wee photograph.
It's a good view of the cathedral from here, isn't it?
I know.
Beautiful. Forgot to mention those watching at home. Camera woman for today is Nicola Morrow. If you've got any questions or want to ask me to do anything, look at anything, feel free to ask her in the chat. Now, Abby, Marcus, at any point you just want me to stop Like you get a few photographs and stuff. Feel absolutely free. Just tell me to be quiet. We're symbolically finding this now. It kind of stands for the great chain of being, the hierarchical ordering of the universe. It's kind of the whether you agree or don't agree, it's kind of the philosophy and principle. We're all part of something bigger. We're all part of, it's kind of like we're all part of the beehive, let's say. Doesn't matter if you're the worker bee, until you appear, or you're the queen bee, you're all part of the same hive. And ultimately, you're all working, pulling in the same direction to make sure the hive thrives.
So are the gravestones also hierarchical then?
Well, I think what you'll find is the higher we go up, the more prominent people are on the top. Yeah, well, definitely. Well, you can't get buried here if you're skint. And when we get up to the top of the necropolis, the main man standing on the hill is actually John Knox. Again, a very, very important figure in the Scottish Reformation.
Yeah.
Now,
He was like a Protestant.
he basically started off Protestantism.
Yeah.
So the Reformation was when there was a revolt against the Vatican, and basically fractured Christianity and created. John Knox was the head of the Church of Scotland, but you had a lot of Presbyterian churches popping up all over Europe. Now, as we're climbing Jacob's ladder, what we start to come focus is the mausoleum of Now, very interesting, the family name here. I spoke earlier about the Da Vinci Code alluding to the St. Clair family being the Holy Grail. Now, the St. Clair family was one of the families that were entrusted to take Robert the Bruce's heart to the Holy Land after his death. The other family, which was entrusted with taking Robert the Bruce's heart to the Holy Land, was the Douglas family, which we have buried here.
Okay.
So not only do we have the Holy Grail buried down in the lower terrace there, we have two of the closest families to Robert the Bruce buried not too far apart. Now, the member of the St. Clair family that was buried here, he was buried in an unmarked grave. He was born in Edinburgh, moved over to America. He was involved in a lot of the very early lodges in Texas. Now, bit of speculation here, but could it actually been an old family friend? In the sense that obviously my surname's Houston. Sam Houston was very influential in the founding and establishing of Texas as a republic. And he would have been floating about at Texas in the same lodges at the same time as Mr. St. Clair, who got buried here. So not only do we have a wee bit of the Holy Grail, but we have the alluding to the links to Robert the Bruce's inner circle, let's say. Now, let's not forget that we were talked about the Reformation. The Reformation was kind of, well, Protestantism, the word comes from Protestants. So they were protesting. Yeah, they were protesting against the monopoly that the church held on religion. And the Pharisees, you could pay. If you wanted to go to heaven, you had to pay them. So Protestantism was kind of, at the time they would have said it was a more pure form of Christianity. They didn't like the decadence and the wealth and the gold the church used to do. So when you look at some of the very first early Protestant churches, you'll see they're very simple. There's no gold, there's no statues, they're all very simple because they went to a more sort of a different interpretation of Christianity. Now, if you have a wee look here, this is the mausoleum of Major Archibald Douglas Monteith, touched on the Douglas family name, and his brother James Monteith Douglas. Now, the Douglas family themselves trace their roots back to it was William Douglas. He was the first Earl of Douglas. He was a nobleman, peer, and he was the trusted deputy of Robert the Bruce. He was also his godfather, and as was par for the course back then, Robert the Bruce entrusted him to marry his daughter. So not only was he Robert the Bruce's godfather, but he actually married Robert the Bruce's daughter as well, kind of keeping it in the family. Now, if you look around this door here, there used to be all the individual gargoyle-esque heads, which is all worn away, unfortunately. But you can still see a little bit of interpretation of what they used to be on the top lantern. So if you look right up there along the ridge of the roof, you can see the faces. They're a wee bit less weathered. Now, it was James Douglas and William St Clair that took Robert, who were entrusted to take Robert the Bruce's heart to the Holy Land after his death, although apparently they didn't make it. Now, the Major himself, quite interesting, he actually served in the East India Company, who controlled large parts and colonised and controlled large parts of India, Southeast Asia, Hong Kong, up until from 1612 up until the British Raj in 1858. Now, he made his fortune. Some people would call him a tea leaf. He made his fortune by serving for the East India Company over in India, and as legend would have it, when he came back, his pockets were full of gems and diamonds. These gems and diamonds came from a Maharaja that he actually stole off of or parted from his treasure. So there was an old king back in India that this Major actually parted with his jewels, brought it back here. Very wealthy, £1,000 down before his death to build this mausoleum. £1,000 didn't actually cover it, so the excess, actually, the Ancient House of Glasgow at the time covered the additional costs. Now, its design is based on the circular rotunda of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. This is the most holy church to the Knights Templar. This is where the Knights Templar, the Warren monks at the time of the Crusades, that's what was their most holy church, and where they used to pray when they were in Jerusalem. Some of the most interesting features, as I said, are the grotesque gargoyle faces, which you can no longer see, but you can see them on the top lantern.
So what do they signify, those faces?
Well, it's not so much, it's more a principle. When you see gargoyles, you typically see them on churches, you see them on mausoleums. It's not representing any bad demons or anything. The idea of that is to scare away bad spirits.
Right.
So a lot of people look at it and go, oh, that's disgusting, that's horrible, but they were deliberately made to be disgusting in the idea of scaring away bad spirits.
Oh, I get that, yeah. So in India, we do have the same stuff, you know. Houses, we have ugly faces and we just scare them away. So I think it has something to do with that.
Well, if you look at it, it's very Middle Eastern in design. And
those masks keep people away, like, you know, like, yeah, and Bhutan, everywhere. South India.
Now, what's interesting about this is on top is an 8-sided lantern. We just walk a wee bit up here, we'll be able to see it a wee bit better.
I'm just wondering why there's no placard, like there's no information about this.
Well, Abby, that goes back to the kind of philosophy of the Reformation. You know, they were getting away from the decadence of the church. They were protesting against the church hoarding wealth, dripping in gold. So when they were making their own mausoleum, as you see, there isn't even an inscription or anything to tell you who's in that.
So that's what I meant.
And that was the principle of trying to be humble, not leaving your gang sign. Although I've a big, massive, beautiful monument. But it was that kind of principle of trying to get away from the decadence of the church, trying to live a more simple and, as they would have seen it, a more godly life at the time.
So just one person buried there, or
Two, him and his
There's
brother.
two, right.
Him and his brother.
not the other family members?
So that's where the Monteith Douglas family, the rich family of Glasgow at the time, were buried. If you notice on top of it, there's an 8-sided lantern.
Right.
Now, most interestingly for me is the wee small thing right on top. Now, that is actually a mini quadratic monument of Lycus. Easy for me to say. It was actually a monument that was on the Acropolis in Greece.
Right.
So at the time, in the early 19th century, a lot of the merchants and Freemasons at the time, they used to love the Greek mythology, the Roman mythology, the Egyptian mythology.
Right.
So they used to look into a lot of the ancient gods. Now, this typically wasn't good for a good Christian person at the time to be looking into other gods and whatnot, so it wasn't particularly advertised. But when you go and look into the Victorians and the rich merchants at the time, they loved nothing more than looking into all their mythology and all the ancient stories, gods and goddesses. Now, the interesting thing about the monument on top is it was a monument on the Acropolis of Athens, and it was erected by the wealthy patrons of the Theatre of Dionysus. Now, the Theatre of Dionysus was considered to be the world's first theatre. Dionysus herself was an ancient Greek god, or himself, was an ancient Greek god. He was the god of harvest, particularly the wine harvest. So the rituals and the cults that involved around Dionysus particularly like to get drunk and have a good time. That's why it was the patrons of the theatre. At the time, the theatre was the place where people went and had a really good time, let their hair down, so on and so forth. That was, let's say, it was the first nightclub. So it's very interesting. We'll continue walking up towards the John Knox statue. But as I said, you can tell a lot of, I believe you can tell a lot from what's actually hidden in the art and architecture. Now, Dionysus was a Greek god, and the Romans called that same god Bacchus. Now, if you go down to Glassford Street in Glasgow, just off of George Square, you've got the Trades Hall, and the Trades Hall is actually where the Grand Lodge of Glasgow is as well.
Right.
Now, right across the road from that is a pub called Bacchus.
Yeah, I saw that one.
Oh,
it's
they're
nice.
up there.
Got a question.
What's the question?
Charlotte's asking, was Dionysus the god of debauchery?
Well, it depends what book you read, I suppose. But interestingly, when the Romans transferred a lot of the ancient Greek gods over, and the Romans used to call Dionysus Bacchus. Now, down in Glassford Street,
Very, yeah.
You went to.
So beautiful.
Marcus, I'm with you in that.
I
I'm never in a position, enough
You
money,
bet.
I'd love to get paid.
know. Exactly the replica of, of the third floor. So people went to the rest on the two. Yeah. So
Because I always thought the Taj Mahal was a bit.
once you reach it's not 100%. What's it like? The people try to reach that in
I don't know what it is in the Bible actually, but no, sorry.
that thing. I mean, like the thing, what the fourth floor and second when the traffic light matters and the left turn, they are posting and so it goes work very serious for language. Yeah.
I think it's the principle of trying to get close to God.
Yeah. So we have, let's say, stories.
At the end of the tour, I'll walk around some of the graves so you can see them a bit more.
All the obelisks. You know, you could say that's them trying to get closer to God as well. You know, it's very obviously a phallic, symbol. And then you die, the more money you've got, the bigger obelisk you can get,
How is
and
it
the closer to God you are.
But it's also, but like, what about the spire as well?
The spires on the churches.
You see, that's phallic then.
Wouldn't surprise me. Depends how dirty your mind is, I suppose. Now, what we're walking up to now is that's Duncan McFarlane's monument. Now, as you can see again, it's very pyramidic in structure. Some would argue if you go and look into a lot of the symbolism in and around the Royal Arch of Freemasonry, you see very similar symbols. So I've not been able to find it confirmed anywhere, but looking at that, you could definitely suggest this man took the Royal Arch of Freemasonry degree. Whether he had or hadn't is up in the air. But again, if you just look at the symbolism and the secret language and stuff, it's very evident in his monument.
Yeah.
And if you notice as well, he's the second highest one here. So they wanted to make him prominent, but not so prominent that he overtook John Knox.
Right?
Yeah,
That's so
that's
interesting.
Now,
sure, no.
as we've touched on, there's a lot of the story of the Reformation coming through in Glasgow's Necropolis. And he was actually a minister and moderator of the General Assembly of the Church of Scotland when it was founded. So that was kind of like the Church of Scotland's political, like a minister. The church used to have a minister who would be very influential politically, especially in Scotland and after the Reformation with the founding of the church. He was also the principal of Glasgow University, and he was so loved by the citizens of Glasgow that when Queen Victoria came to Glasgow Cathedral in 1849, he was the actual one that meet and greeted Queen Victoria. If you go down to George Square, where there's the statue of Queen Victoria and Prince Albert, on the bottom you will see a wee placard that was actually presented on the day that Queen Victoria was meet and greeted by Duncan McFarlane. So if you're ever down in George Square, look down the base of the Queen Victoria statue and you'll see a couple of placards commemorating her visit to Glasgow when Mr. Duncan McFarlane actually met her. Now, as you can see, we're moving up now the John Knox statue. Now, interestingly enough, this monument was actually placed here in 1825. So that's 7 years, so 8 years before the necropolis was actually officially opened. He was placed here when this place was just a park. This used to be an old Victorian park for the rich merchants of Glasgow. It was only after they seen what happened, what was getting done in Paris with the Pierre Lachaise, that the merchants of Glasgow then wanted to recreate that here in Glasgow. And as you can see, they've done a very good job with the Glasgow Necropolis.
So this, did you say this was here before it was a cemetery?
Yep, this was the...
This is a monument rather than a
yeah,
grave.
yeah. John Knox, I don't even think he came to Glasgow. He's buried through in Edinburgh, in a car park in Edinburgh. Yeah, underneath a car park with all the best people. I'm pretty well, at least people are talking about him even if he wasn't buried in a nice place. So John Knox...
People walk over it. That's what they sort of walk in and cemetery. So the same thing. People tread over it in the Windsor Manor.
Just don't get a shiver down your spine. That's like walking over your grave, isn't it? So John Knox himself, he was a leader and the leader of the Reformation and founder of the Presbyterian churches. He was influenced by early reformers such as George Wishart, who I alluded to earlier on, whose name now sits down on this street. Now, interestingly enough, if we look down onto Wishart Street, that actually used to be a burn. That used to be the Mollendinar burn. So it was converted over in the late 19th century, which is a shame really, because I'm pretty sure a lot of us would still love to have a lovely wee burn running down there, but no such luck. It's been converted over as the wood. But it does allude to the Reformation again by that called Wishart Street, and that refers to George Wishart, who was a leading figure in the early Reformation movement in Scotland. Now, John Knox himself is interesting. He was actually took by France and made a galley slave for his participation in the early Reformation movements. He was then exiled to England, where he rose to royal chaplain, but he had to leave when Mary Tudor ascended, re-establishing Roman Catholicism down in England. He then went and spent time in Geneva with one of the main figures of the Reformation, and he returned to Scotland to head up the Scottish Reformation. Now, it was nearly 10 years before the opening of the Necropolis that Mr. Reverend Dr. Robert Stevenson McGill, who he was a professor of theology at Glasgow University, he proposed the first statue of John Knox in Scotland. And this is it. So believe it or not, in 1825, it took that long for the main figure of Scotland's Reformation to actually get a monument dedicated to him. And it was on the 22nd of September 1825, where upwards of 300 people marched through Lodge, Grand Lodge. Basically, the Freemasons built it, and back in the time they used to do a Freemasonic ceremony where they would lay the cornerstone and ceremony to mark buildings and that film. So, as you see, we get a beautiful view of Glasgow Cathedral here. That's basically where Glasgow all started. This is the medieval heart of Glasgow. Just in front of the cathedral, you get High Street, and High Street is the oldest street in Glasgow. I think it's actually the only medieval street that still exists in Glasgow, although I might be wrong. Now, the cathedral itself is built on the site of St Mungo's tomb. There was originally a church built here, a wooden church in the 6th century, and it took to the 12th century before they started building a stone church, and that was built by King David I. St Mungo's tomb is in the lower crypt, and it's the only church in the mainland of Scotland that wasn't destroyed and de-roofed during the Reformation. That's why you get a lot of the old cathedrals. St Andrews is one of the most famous ones. You go up there and the cathedral's just all in ruins, basically. So the cathedral and Glasgow Castle, which I'll go on to in a wee second, played important parts in the Battle of Glasgow in 1544 to 1560. These were wars in and around the Reformation and the struggles that happened between Catholicism and inside the monarchy and Protestants inside the monarchy. There was a jostling for power inside the monarchy after the Reformation, where the Vatican wanted a Catholic on the throne, and the new established Presbyterian churches obviously wanted a Protestant on the throne. So this resulted in a lot of wars.
So when was the actual Reformation?
It was in the 16th century.
So around 1500s.
Yeah, the 1500s. That's when a lot of the early reformers and stuff, the reformed churches started.
And so when was this built, the Glasgow Cathedral?
Well, Glasgow Cathedral, there was a wooden church built there in the 6th century.
Right.
The stone building you see just now was the 12th century. And interestingly enough as well, Glasgow Cathedral is where Glasgow University was actually started in 1451. It was then moved in 1460, just down the road in High Street where there's a junction with Duke Street, and that's where it remained up until 1870, where the university then moved to its current home up in Gilmore Hill, up in the West End.
So I guess at that time the university used to be a bit more about theology at that point. Anyway, so
Theology would have been a major part of it.
Yeah.
Duncan McFarlane, he was part of theology in Glasgow University and stuff, so religion used to play a much larger role in politics and society than it does today. Or we presume it does today, but anyway. So what's interesting enough as well, we can see Glasgow Royal Infirmary there, which is a beautiful building, but that is on the site of where Glasgow Castle used to stay. Not very many people know that Glasgow used to have a castle.
no, I didn't know that.
That's why that's called Castle Street. There's a wee street
Yeah,
there called Castle Street. I always wondered
What,
why.
down there? Yeah.
And it's because the Royal Infirmary is built on the area of the old castle. Now, it was a castle. It was fortified structure. It wasn't a castle as we typically think of it as an Edinburgh castle. But it was sometimes called the Bishop's Palace. It was sometimes called the Bishop's Castle, Glasgow Castle, and now today the Royal Infirmary. Now, the castle itself, or Bishop's Castle, is where the bishops and archbishops used to reside until the Reformation. So, the last archbishop actually fled the castle in 1560. Now, the castle was completely destroyed in the 18th century to make way for the Royal Infirmary, which is a crying shame. I'm sure we would all still love to have Glasgow Castle, but if you put yourself in the position of the citizens at the time of the Reformation, that stood for everything they just protested against. That's where the bishops and the archbishops were the Catholic, the Vatican's seat of power inside Glasgow. So it's no surprise that the citizens of Glasgow didn't mind going into disrepair and eventually getting demolished. Although today I'm pretty sure they would all still love Glasgow Castle to be here. Now, the origins of the castle are unclear, but it was recorded as a royal fortress in the mid-13th century. From 1296 to 1301, it was fought over many times by William Wallace and Edward I Longshanks in the Wars of Scottish Independence. I mean, even people in Glasgow aren't aware of how interlinked our history is with Longshanks and William Wallace and all the stories in and around Braveheart. Now, interestingly enough, during Mary Queen of Scots times, and Mary Queen of Scots was inherently involved in the struggles of the Reformation between the Protestants and the Catholics. So during Mary Queen of Scots struggles, the castle changed times over 6 times between 1513 and 1570. Again, this was linked with the wars that were involved with the struggle between Protestantism, the newly established Protestant churches, and Catholicism of the time. In 1980, there was foundations of the castle found and excavated at St Mungo's Museum. Now, if you look just to the left of the cathedral, you'll see St Mungo's Museum. Now, that's actually built in a style trying to try and replicate the what they believe Bishop's Castle, Glasgow Castle, actually used to look like. Now, in 1791, after the castle was destroyed, land was granted for a hospital, and originally a 5-storey building was designed by Robert and James Adam, with other buildings added in 1816 and 1829. Being replaced by the current building that we see today in 1914, which was opened by King George V. The original architects were Robert Adams, also foreseen the building of the Trade Halls, which was the Grand Lodge, but he died just a couple of months before the building itself was actually complete. So his brother was in charge with actually completing the building of the castle. So,
Can I ask a question? You spoke about how the residents of Glasgow weren't bothered with the destruction of the original castle because it stood for everything that the Catholic Church stood for. So why did the Catholic Cathedral still remain? Why were the citizens of Glasgow not happy to see that?
well, it wasn't the citizens; it was the merchants. It was the merchants that stopped it was the merchants that stopped the reformers burning the cathedral down. Now, it's still technically a cathedral Catholicism, but it's actually a Protestant church. So it isn't a Catholic cathedral, it's actually a Protestant church. Now, that's the end of our wee stroll up to Jacob's Ladder. If anybody in the chat has any questions, please ask my sister just now. So has there been any questions in the chat?
Let me take a walk around some stones, that's what they wanted.
Now, an interesting thing you'll notice about this necropolis is the amount of obelisks. And anybody that's into their iconography could be here all day trying to decipher all the icons and symbolisms incorporated in all the monuments, headstones and mausoleums inside the necropolis. Okay, now that is the tour over. Hopefully you have enjoyed it. If anybody out there is interested in any private walking or interactive live tours, please contact me on all the links below. And please leave all your comments, and I would love a review as well. As you are aware, I'm just started up the company, so if you could please go and leave as many good reviews if you enjoyed it as you possibly can. So, thank you, Marcus. Thank you, Abby.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
showing us around. It was lovely. Knowing the history about it, huh?
We're going to go and seek some shelter and stuff. But I'll just end the line. Just from here.
Great.
Say thanks to everybody at home.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Catchies.